Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask kind of an interesting question because he's saying, hey, you were talking quite a bit about the de novo lipogenesis thing of how converting carbohydrates to fat in the human body actually costs calories. It's not like just a free conversion. You can't just store carbs as fat, and the body is really resistant to do it in humans, unlike mice, cattle, things like that. So what would happen if I went on a really, really low fat, like just the minimum for basic health, of fat and had a maintenance of about 3,000 calories, went on 4,000 calories of carbs? Could I bulk up? Would I gain a lot of muscle with almost no fat? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, this is a rather complex question. Short answer, you can do this. You will probably gain less fat on this. You will definitely gain less fat on this than you would on a more balanced mix of macronutrients on the same caloric intake. But it's not necessarily going to be more anabolic either. It's still a decent way to bulk. Yeah, it will minimize fat gains, but it's not going to eliminate them completely. And there's the fact to consider that you're basically wasting calories in a way, so those calories aren't necessarily contributing to performance or muscle gain, and I'll get to that in a minute. All right, so essentially what he's talking about is the fact that I've talked about in the Q&As this week, as well as other videos, particularly my one with what's his name, John Venus, where John Venus is actually right. He's the only other YouTuber besides me who I know of who actually talks about this. Talks about the fact that it's been noted in quite a few studies. Lyle McDonald has documented this extensively with resources. If you guys go read his UD 2.0 book, that yeah, when people who are in a caloric deficit go on ultra-high carbohydrate overfeeding, and when I say ultra-high, I'm talking 2,000 plus calories over maintenance. Like someone with a 3,000 calorie maintenance going on like 5,000 calories. All right, 5,000 plus calories for a day or two, they gain almost no body fat. If they've been in a caloric deficit before that and they just jump to this, as long as their dietary fat is really, really low. And that's because there's these misconceptions that people have that humans actually store carbohydrates as fat. You don't. People have this idea that you have this enormous insulin response from eating carbohydrates, but actually the truth is healthy, active people who don't have metabolic issues don't have high circulating insulin levels even if they eat like a 70 or 80% carb diet. It actually doesn't happen. If you have high circulating insulin levels from eating even a bunch of white rice, you actually have medical problems. You have some metabolic issues that need to be addressed. You have actual medical issues. You have health problems. Normal, healthy people don't do that. Just so people understand what's going on there. You don't produce an enormous insulin response to just eating starchy carbohydrates in humans. It doesn't happen. That's a sign of illness. But yeah, what tends to happen, you don't gain fat in those situations, and you don't store fat directly from carbohydrates. What happens is that carbohydrates, glucose, is your body's preferred fuel source. When given an opportunity, it will burn it in preference over fat, which is why normally you need to create a caloric deficit to burn fat, because your body tends to burn what you eat, right? It burns what you eat first. So until you burn through what you eat, your body doesn't tap into your body fat stores. That's well understood. But generally, when you eat both carbs and fat, your body will tend to burn the carbs. And if it has surplus fat left, it'll store the fat. It'll burn some of the fat too, but it tends to store the dietary fat that you eat. The majority of body fat on your body that you have was fat that you ate at some point, not other things turning into fat. So that's kind of the idea. And there's a process called de novo lipogenesis, which means the creation of new fat. That is a process by which the body can convert carbohydrates into fat. However, humans don't do this easily. Humans don't do this easily. Originally, we thought that humans did from studying rodent models and cattle models, but it turns out they do it at a much, much higher rate than humans do. We just don't store carbohydrates as fat easily when studied in the laboratory. But yeah, when people, and this has been studied on men and women, and a women's study was the best one I saw because they really looked at it close, like giving these women 1,500 extra calories over their maintenance of almost all carbohydrates, and what they found, they only stored about 10 calories of the carbs they ate as fat. With a massive overfeeding, 10 calories of fat, there's 3,500 calories in a pound. So you're talking about basically 10 grams or 10 calories of fat being stored would take you an entire year to gain a pound doing that if you did that every day. But, you know, they stored some of the fat they ate, but they had very, very little de novo lipogenesis for the first 2 days. Around the 3rd day, the body starts increasing it. So people say, well, doesn't this break calories in, calories out? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because what happens, your body burns it off as heat. You're giving your body a fuel source, and your body's going to do something with it. In the case of surplus carbohydrates, they don't get stored as fat. They'll make you store the fat that you eat as fat because you've got all these extra carbs to burn, so your body doesn't need to burn any fat. Why would it? It doesn't have to. It's got carbs. It loves carbs. Your body thrives on carbohydrates. It is your body's preferred and most efficient fuel source. That's why it's the best fuel source for athletes. It's why people who carb up who are top-level elite athletes. Your body performs amazing on carbohydrates. Fat is a long-term energy source. You know, your body stores fat so you can use it when you're starving or when the famine hits. It doesn't necessarily need it as a fuel source. It prefers carbohydrates. So it burns those first and stores the fat. All right. So pretty much what happens, surplus carbohydrates, unless your body has to, unless there's so many for a prolonged period of time, it doesn't store them. It fills your liver glycogen, it fills your muscle glycogen, and once those get full, your body tends to shuttle the extra glucose into the mitochondria of your muscle cells, right? Those little engines there, and they heat up, and it burns it off as body heat. And yeah, you can burn 1,000 calories a day this way. You can burn through 1,000 calories of carbs easily that way. You can burn right through it. However, your body will eventually, it will keep burning through extra of it and raising body temperature and basically raising your base metabolic rate and everything. It will increase your energy output. It's not breaking calories in, calories out. It's turning the heat into energy. It's using it for a purpose, and that raises body temperature. That's why you tend to sweat. So people who are way overfeeding carbs, you get hot, you get sweaty, you can get real temperature sensitive because your body is just burning it off as heat. You get hot, you get very warm natured. So what ends up happening, you then store the fat that you eat. So hypothetically, what would happen over time, you would still gain fat doing this, but if you're eating a very small amount of fat, like 30 grams or something a day, which is probably about the minimum you're going to safely get away with without health problems, depending upon the composition of that fat, you know, that's only about 30 grams of fat you can even store every day. Your body will eventually start storing more of the carbohydrates as fat, but the rest is going to burn off as energy. Now, the question we get into is, well, wouldn't this allow you to eat a lot of calories and gain more muscle? Well, no, you won't gain more muscle. And the reason for it, think about it this way. Bulking and gaining weight is still about calories in, calories out. The scale's going to go up, but it's not going to be more anabolic than if you had just eaten the amount of food that you needed to fuel your training to recover and gain the weight you wanted to gain, right? If your body is using a metabolic process to increase its temperature and to kick out more calories, those calories aren't having an anabolic effect. All right, they're not having an anabolic effect. They're not going to your fat tissue, and they're not going to your muscle tissue as something usable either. They're just being burned off. It's burning through them. So yeah, you're going to gain less fat because you're wasting calories. Basically, your maintenance is no longer 3,000. You're actually burning through more than 3,000 calories at this point because your body is burning hundreds of extra calories as fuel. But, you know, you have to figure the 30 grams of fat, probably about the minimum you're going to get away with. A lot of that's being stored as body fat. That does accumulate over time. That does accumulate. Some of the carbohydrates, when you're consuming enough to regularly burn off extra carbohydrates as body heat that way to the point of where your total energy turnover is going up hundreds of calories, your body is going to start converting a bit of it into body fat and storing it. Now, of course, the point is something like 20 to 30% of the calories being there that are being converted are actually being burned off as heat is the process also of converting the carbohydrates into fat. So technically, if your body tries to store 100 calories of carbohydrates as fat, it's going to have to burn through about 1/3 of those calories just to handle the process involved. All right, because it can't store them directly. It has to put them through a chemical process, and that requires energy. That energy is calories. So you're going to end up only storing about maybe 70 calories out of that 100 that it tried to because of the energy. It's metabolically expensive. But the thing that you've got to remember, you're still going to gain fat doing this. You're still going to gain fat. It just won't be as much fat. But technically, your caloric surplus is smaller because you've burned off more energy. That would be like saying, if I wanted to eat X amount of food and I go do an extra 500 calories of cardio every day, will I gain less fat? And will I gain an anabolic effect from eating the food? No, why would you? You go do an extra 500 calories of cardio every day so you could eat an extra 500 calories of food. You just burned through those extra calories. They're not necessarily having an overall anabolic effect for you, not a noticeable one, because you burned them off. You burned them off. But they're also not going to your body fat. So essentially all you've done is done a bit of metabolic trickery that has raised your caloric output. You've raised your caloric output. So you're not actually on 1,000 calorie surplus anymore. But will it still put body fat on you? Yes. You would probably actually gain less body fat doing the same thing if you still lowered yourself down to 3,500 calories instead of 4,000. Because you're consuming so many that your body pretty much has to store the fat that you eat, because it's not really going to burn through it, and it has to increase de novo lipogenesis at that point. So you're probably still gaining a little more body fat than you actually need to. But will it be much, much lower than if you ate 4,000 calories on a higher fat diet? Absolutely. You'll gain a lot more fat. If you were eating like 30% of your calories from fat on a 4,000 calorie diet. And it has to do with the fact that your body's just going to store the extra fat, because you got 1,000 calorie surplus to work with every day, plenty of fat to store away, plenty of carbs to burn through. It's just going to store the extra fat. You're going to gain fat more quickly. So again, it's metabolic trickery. Yeah, it'll let you eat more food, but you do have to ask the question, are you doing it because you just really want to eat more food and you love carbohydrates and you love rice and potatoes? If that's the case, okay, then that's fine. But if you're doing it thinking you're going to gain some extra benefit, you're not. You're just consuming extra calories that your body is having to deal with in some way for no actual benefit. It may not be helping you at all. In worst cases, it might actually be harming your progress. It's hard to say. So hopefully that answers the question, because it's a pretty complex question. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.